You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. Whether it's for food, fuel, drinks, or snacks, about half the U.S. population shops at a convenience store every day. We'll talk about what we see at stores and what the future may hold for our industry.
Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Jeff Lenard with NACS.
And I am Donovan Woods with the Fuels Institute.
And Donovan, we often talk about how important convenience stores are in communities and how they respond when the community needs them. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about how those volunteers rally when there's an issue and in their community and how they make a difference and what stores can do to partner and together make a difference when people really need it. So today we're joined by Dan Halliburton. He is he's on the Advanced Public Affairs team for the American Red Cross. What that means is he's a volunteer and he goes out in the field and he responds when there is a issue that needs responding to, whether that's a hurricane or tornado or any sort of natural disaster. So welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much. Glad to be with you.
So one of the things that we talked about with the Red Cross is we know there's something like 64,000 natural responses that the Red Cross has in a given year. But as we look at it, and many of them are house fires, or the majority are house fires, which are certainly a major concern to anybody who has a house fire. Mm-hmm. But in looking at these broad issues, it's hurricane season in 2018. What do the volunteers in the Red Cross do to communicate now before a disaster hits? What are the kinds of things that you look at?
Well, it's probably the most important thing that we do, and that's getting people ready for disasters. You know, we have seen over and over again when people make the right kind of preparation and they are prepared for disasters, they just respond better. They're likely to come out the other side with the least amount of damage and certainly come out alive and healthy, and that's what we want. So planning for the future, just like for the businesses that you are involved in, it's really everything. You've got to be ready for whatever's coming your way, and you get that way when you make a good plan.
And when you look at a good plan, when, say, something happens, like, for instance, last year there were a couple hurricanes and you were on the ground helping out there, is there something that you saw that businesses did that was really smart, that showed that it minimized the impact of the event? Or is there something that you had wished that was different so they could have prepared a little better?
Well, I think one of the things I see about a lot of businesses, and certainly in the convenience stores, that they are aware that, and they're paying attention to the changing nature of what's happening around them. And, you know, we get the advantages, especially being here in hurricane season, we get good advanced warning on hurricanes. We've got a lot of technology today. So whether it's a hurricane watch or hurricane warning, we've got a pretty good track. But every once in a while, we'll get a surprise, and a storm can move or change quickly. So I think that really means being ready to go at the beginning of the season, and then being ready to prepared for that season. But being ready to make a quick move should something happen, you know, in the environment around you. You know, I think staying tuned to local media, whether it's television, radio, newspapers, just staying aware of what's going on around you will help an operator, I think, be in much better shape should they have a hurricane.
Now, Dan, Jeff mentioned that you are a volunteer with the American Red Cross, and I'm just curious, how does one do that, and why would you do that if it's not something that's paid?
Well, for my personal situation, I grew up in Miami, Florida, and so hurricanes were definitely part of my life growing up as a kid in Miami. And later in life, I had a little more time on my hands and decided that I wanted to do some volunteer work. The Red Cross came to mind. And I guess I was always probably a little bit of a weather geek, too. I like the weather, interested in the weather, fascinated by it. And certainly so many of the things that the Red Cross responds to are weather-related. So I had that time and got involved. And it's just been an amazing experience to go out and be part of a small part of helping somebody when they may be at their very worst. They may be dealing with one of the worst circumstances they've ever experienced in their life. And the ability to just play a small role and maybe touch somebody in that process is really rewarding.
Do you have an example, Dan, of something where you were on the ground, you know that you're doing it for all the right reasons and you're making a difference, but just a story, an anecdote from some particular incident where it's just, this is really impactful. This is life altering in terms of how do you see things differently?
Well, one of I remember somebody from almost every response that I've been out on, but I remember in particular a fella in Miami, Florida. He was in a shelter in Miami-Dade County. He lived on a boat in the Florida Keys. Fortunately, he did the right thing. He listened to our warnings and the warnings of the media, which was, get out of the Florida Keys. And he lived on a boat. He lost his boat. One sunk in the harbor. The other one disappeared and was never found again. They don't know where it ended up. And he was living in a shelter with 2 cats. And there was just something really special about this guy, and he was, despite losing everything, he was upbeat about the future. He knew he was going to kind of get through it, and eventually, and I follow him now on Facebook every once in a while. We'll get on the phone, and I'll just check in on him and see how he's doing. But he's got a new boat, finally. And he's living back on his boat, and it's just being able to play a part in his recovery from that storm meant an awful lot. He lost everything. He lost both boats. He lost one of those cats when he moved back down to the Keys. He lost one of them. So the guy had been facing a lot, but still he kind of kept his positive attitude about the future, and it definitely recovered. I always tell people it will get better, and it really does. And it may not get better immediately, but it does get better.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad you told that story. That's as a pet owner, that kind of grabs me a little bit, so I appreciate that. The next question I was thinking about in particular is most of us in the States have a vehicle, and when something like this happens, as you said, we may have advanced warning. When we have that type of warning ahead of time, is there anything in particular that you could tell those who have vehicles or in terms of preparing or getting ready so that they can maybe get out of town when they need to?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's all part of that plan. And we talk a lot about, you hear a lot about go bags, disaster kits. Right. And you certainly need to be prepared for that and be prepared all the time. When I lived in the North, and I lived in the Minneapolis area, you always had a go bag in your car, right? You were ready because you might end up with some bad weather, some ice, maybe snow could be off the road, and you needed things that you carried in your car with you all the time. We probably don't do that so much in the Sun Belt. We get a lot of advance warning on hurricanes, certainly. But it's a great idea to keep some of the things that you need in your car, because it's likely that the car will become your mechanism to get out of harm's way. One of the other things I always like to talk about with automobile is how it's the most powerful electricity source you have. And if you think about our world today and all the devices that we need to keep powered up, our phones, our tablets, our computers, your automobile has the ability to help you get that done. So if nothing else, you want to keep what I call a digital disaster kit, both in your home and keep one in your car, because you're going to have those devices with you, right? Because as soon as we walk out the door, we could forget our wallet, but we won't forget our phones. Absolutely. So if you can kind of be prepared for that, you'll find that communication in the aftermath of a disaster is probably the most problematic thing that people run into. Phone lines are down, cell towers are out. That can happen in a flood. It could happen in a hurricane. It could happen in a tornado. And so communications is really critical. Another part of communications is, this is simple. keeping the phone numbers written down of the people that you want to get in touch with. Because if your phone is lost or it dies, then who remembers, your mom's home phone number or somebody's cell number? We're just so used to telling the phone to make the call or looking at our contact list. So some of those old school keeping things on paper are a good idea. And that's certainly part of the plan that we encourage people that if they're evacuating an area, that they take with them important documents. One, to prove that they live where they say they live. Sometimes people's driver's licenses aren't up to date with their home address. And there are other documents and things that you want to carry with you. Physically, if you could carry the paper documents, that's a great idea. Keep them in Ziploc bags and a watertight plastic container just in case. And we're also encouraging people to take photos or scans of important documents and put them on one of those little thumb drives. You can get one at one of the stores and pick one up and make sure that you copy those documents onto that, because that's part of the recovery process, and communications are going to be tough, and you're going to need those documents as well.
Well, tagging on with Donovan's question about vehicles, obviously going to convenience stores, I'm sure that you have instances where pretty much every disaster, the convenience store is the last one to close and the first one to open in an area, and they're the ones that provide access to ATMs, to bottled water, to gas. Is there a story that we should be telling as an industry about how important we are to disaster relief?
Well, absolutely. And usually when I can tell you that for so many Red Crossers and for me personally, those convenience stores are a lifeline. We're constantly, especially in hurricane situations, on the search for fuel, making sure that we're fueled up. We're looking for, some energy to keep us going, drinks and energy bars and what have you, some of the simple things that you may have forgotten to run out of while you're on deployment. And, when you walk into the store with your Red Cross gear on, kind of a whole new conversation begins, because people want to tell you about what's going on and what's happening in the area. And then we're doing the same thing. A lot of times we'll be in a convenience store. We know that there's been a challenge in the area, something that has to do with the disaster, and we'll ask, what do you know? What have you heard about? I remember being in a convenience store in a station in Mariposa, California for a wildfire. And I loved that store. I would go back there every day. They had the guy that ran the counter was just the nicest guy. It was a few blocks from a shelter we were operating. And I could find that he was in touch with the community. You could tell he was a guy that had his ear on the drumbeat of what was happening in that small town. And so not only the supplies were a good thing, but the information was a great thing.
And in those communities, is there something that you could think about? You talked about go bags for people that are affected in an area, but can a retailer do something? Is there a way to reach out to the Red Cross and say, hey, here is how we can work together before something happens? So when it happens and we are going down that checklist, we are including you, and you're able to make a difference before the chaos ensues.
Absolutely. Again, it goes back to that plan, and there are so many ways that we in the community can work together on that. With the incredible number of people who come through those stores every day, it's a great place to reach out to touch somebody, and whether that's home safety or home fire safety. I know some of the chains have supported that and helped us in that area. Certainly getting ready for hurricane season, we're trying to make sure that we've got the dollars that the Red Cross needs to provide the support that's needed in places that may be hit by a hurricane. So there are a lot of ways to work together on that, preparing your employees to be ready for that, because they've got families too. And so if they've got a plan, if they know what they're going to do, if they're going to be back online, like you said earlier, they're the last ones to close and the first ones to open, then they got to be aware of where their family is going to be, how they're going to deal with the challenges that a disaster brings. So there are a lot of ways to work together. And I think also to be prepared in just the operation of the store itself. One of the things that I've seen happen is because you're open late and then not closed very long and then back open again, people have a lot of questions. If fuel is involved, people are looking. So anything that you can do to communicate the circumstances of whether you're open or not, whether you have fuel or not, if you do have fuel, that you help kind of create lines so that people can flow through quickly. Those are the kind of things that are going to help the whole process of getting people back on their feet.
So is there, if you are a fuel retailer, are there certain avenues in terms of being prepared way before something ever happens that they should be in contact with, or show their support in some way before that happens?
Well, I think that certainly the Red Cross has many ways that we can work together on that. I think you could certainly talk to people about, be prepared, preparedness. Right now, we're involved with a smoke alarm campaign across the United States. As you mentioned earlier in the broadcast, we've got a lot of people who are impacted by fires on a daily basis. So we're really trying to make sure that people are equipped with smoke alarms in their homes. That's a great campaign. I'd say reach out to the Red Cross chapter in your area and find out how we could pair up, how we could work together to make sure that our communities are ready.
And maybe tagging on to what you had said earlier about the Go box or the GoKit, something, it doesn't matter if you're in Minnesota and it's something related to ice and snow, or Miami where it has something to do with hurricanes, or it has to do with wildfires in California, or anywhere in between. You had touched upon a couple of the essentials, but when we're talking about a GoKit, it doesn't have to be big. It just has to have a couple of those essentials about thinking through what are you going to do, where are you going to go, who are you going to talk to. You don't need to really pack like luggage or anything like that, or is that something that you want to also look at?
I think what you're looking for a practical way to be away from your home for a shorter period of time. We look at about a 72-hour window. What's the number one most important thing that we all got to have in any period of time? It's water. So you got to make sure that you're prepared with water, with a gallon per person per day. Some non-perishable food, and things that you can depend on, canned food items and so on. You want to make sure you've got, and this is where I'm thinking of a convenience store, is batteries, flashlights. Those are the kind of things that people often take for granted and might not have, and they're going to really need them. So those are the kind of simple things that people ought to have with them. Some personal hygiene items, some toilet paper, toothbrush, toothpaste, a razor, other hygiene items. So, those small items, and just keep enough to keep yourself with the very basics for just a few days, so that if you have to leave your home or you can't get back to your home, that you've got the things with you that will get you through that short period of time. And of course, if a disaster has hit the area, you can count on Red Cross shelters being open, and those will be widely advertised. And once the stores are open back up again, it would make good sense to know where the Red Cross shelters were. So if somebody came into a store and said, hey, I'm looking for this, or I need this help, well, hey, go look for the Red Cross shelter. It's over, nearby. Know what those locations are. And you can find those on our Red Cross app, by the way. If you have a smartphone, both for iPhone and for Android phones, you can download the Red Cross Emergency app. It covers all of the major emergencies that could hit, and it includes shelter locations when shelters are open in your area.
Just one more question, and maybe this is just I don't know what part of me this is, but with all this information on preparing before something happens, do you ever face pushback and people thinking, well, you're just being paranoid and I don't want to worry about these things until they happen? How do you conquer that type of thinking?
I think we just have to remind people constantly. I think we are so busy in our lives. We're all on the run, and we just have to keep encouraging people in, avenues like this one to say, hey, sit down for a minute, go to redcross.org, work up a plan, make sure you have an evacuation plan, whether it's for a house fire or for a greater disaster. And just take a few minutes to do it. A few minutes of planning can make a world of difference to you and your life, to your loved ones. And I think that goes for business too. Sitting down for a few minutes and thinking about, all right, what would the impact be on my employees if we're hit by a hurricane or another major disaster? And how will we survive that? How will we work together to get that done? So I think it means sitting down for a minute and thinking about it. And then certainly taking action.
Yeah, and related to that, Dan, there's a simple checklist, and then there's a more complicated one. And you hear about people like Captain Sullenberger, who landed the plane. The reason he landed the plane on the Hudson is they had a checklist, and they knew what they were going to do before something happened. And when it's astronauts, Apollo 12, 13? 13. Haven't seen that movie in a while. Those types of events, there's a checklist, and it's a simple thing. These are the most important things. We'll go through this, and then maybe you build upon that into something more complicated, and it works whether you're a business or just a household. And that's probably the best advice that we can take back from today.
Yeah, we have a list that we put out. There are 10 items. Do these 10 things, and you're going to make sure that you're in much better condition to face a disaster should it come your way. So, and we've talked about a lot of those today. Redcross.org has all kinds of information about that. Like we talked about, the app is a great way to find out about that. And while you're there at the redcross.org, you can find out how to volunteer. You can find out about how you might donate, because we're always planning on that next disaster, because wherever we are, we may be in one, there will be one, unfortunately, right around the corner.
Well, thank you, Dan. We appreciate your friendly face, your helpfulness wherever disaster strikes, and it means a lot. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's an honor.
And thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
Convenience Matters is brought to you by NACS and produced in partnership with Human Factor. For more information, visit convenience.org.